everyone, welcome back to Mind Matters. This season, I want to talk about prejudices, not just from a moral or ethical perspective, but really looking at how they operate in our brains. How do these hidden influencers shape our decisions? I explore how we think so we can reshape our world from the inside out, because in the end, every mind matters. Hello, and welcome to Mind Matters. My name is Ivana, and I host, research, and write this podcast. Today is a wrap on Season 3 on mental shortcuts and occasional stumbles of our brains works, aka biases. Ever wondered how a billion-dollar company can sink without a single storm cloud in sight? Or how a luxury music festival can implode before the first bass drop even hits? These aren't just random fiascos. They're the culmination of deeply ingrained biases, mental shortcuts that whisper in our ears, telling us everything's fine, or that we're the smartest people in the room right up until we're not. Today, I am going to spotlight some of the most infamous corporate and cultural disasters. I'm talking about the business flops that left entire industries reeling, and the social meltdowns that made front-page headlines. From the downfall of Blockbuster, for my Euro friends, this was the video rental giant in the US, to the meltdown at the Fire Festival. The common denominator, bias. Now, bias might sound like a buzzword. We hear it daily in headlines. Media bias, political bias, confirmation bias. But here's the thing. These mental shortcuts are not just about making mistakes. They're about how our brains handle uncertainty and risk. Even the brightest minds, armed with fancy degrees and spreadsheets, can be led astray. And in the next few minutes or so, I'll examine how everything from overconfidence bias to groupthink has toppled massive enterprises and fueled disasters of every stripe. And don't worry, this isn't going to be a grim lecture. We're closing out this season with a vivid, story-driven approach. We'll piece together how each disaster was shaped by a specific cluster of biases, and more importantly, what we can learn to avoid such pitfalls in our own lives. Because let's be real, maybe we're not all CEOs or NASA scientists, but who among us hasn't doubled down on a terrible choice just because we'd already spent too much time, money, or ego on it? I've lovingly titled this season finale Bias in the Wild, How Mental Shortcuts Crash Companies and Fuel Disasters. If you've been with me all season, you know I like to peel back the layers and show you the raw psychology underneath our everyday behavior. Today, we're taking that mission to its zenith, showcasing how our mental shortcuts can either save us precious thinking time or lead to catastrophic outcomes. Let's begin by laying out the usual suspects, the mental biases that pop up in the stories we'll be discussing today. And trust me, you'll see these names again and again. Overconfidence bias. This is the big one. Overconfidence bias is the tendency to assume we're more capable, more accurate, or more knowledgeable than we actually are. It's the CEO who feels unstoppable after a few wins and believes every subsequent decision will automatically pan out. When you see entire boards of directors or entire engineering teams brushing off warnings, there's a good chance overconfidence bias is playing behind the scenes. Status quo bias. Humans love to stick to what we know. We prefer the existing state of affairs because it feels comfortable. Change is scary, but in business, technology, or safety decisions, clinging to the old ways can sometimes be a fatal move. Sunk cost fallacy. Perhaps the most relatable bias. Our inner voice goes like this. I've already spent $1 million on this project. If I give up now, that money was wasted. We often keep pouring resources into a losing game simply because we are attached to our previous investment. Halo effect. Ever forgiven your favorite movie star for a bad film just because they're usually so charismatic? That's the halo effect. When one positive trait, like charm, intellect, or success, blinds us to glaring faults. In business, a charismatic founder can overshadow flawed financials. authority bias. We're wired to trust people who seem to have authority, whether from titles, fame, or expert status. If a Nobel Prize winner says something questionable outside their field, we might still believe it just because, it's them. Groupthink. When a tight-knit team values harmony and consensus so much that they suppress dissenting viewpoints, everyone ends up nodding along, ignoring warning signs, and rationalizing questionable decisions to maintain the peace. Bandwagon effect, the everyone else is doing it bias. If we see a massive crowd rushing in one direction, think stock buying frenzies or social media hype, our instinct is to join in, sometimes without fully understanding why. Consider these 7 biases your scavenger hunt items as I talk about our case files. Every time you spot one, it's like collecting a mental trophy. Let's wind the clock back to the year 2000. Blockbuster was a household name, synonymous with movie rentals. People flocked to stores on Friday nights, searching shelves for the latest videos or DVDs. Meanwhile, a young company named Netflix, yes, the DVD mail order service at the time, approached Blockbuster with a proposition, buy us for $50 million. Blockbuster's response, no way, Jose. They laughed them out of the boardroom. Why did they say no? Overconfidence, for one. Blockbuster's top brass believed they had an unassailable business model. They saw Netflix's approach, mail order DVDs, and eventually streaming, as a mere curiosity. Status quo bias also played a huge part. Executives were comfortable with their late fee revenue model. Shifting to streaming meant changing everything, and it's human nature to avoid messing with a good thing until that good thing becomes irrelevant. Within a decade, Netflix soared to become a multi-billion-dollar streaming juggernaut, while Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. And then there was Nokia. Nokia once commanded the mobile phone market. Everyone had a sturdy Nokia. Remember the iconic brick phone and that unstoppable snake game? Then Apple introduced the iPhone, and the smartphone revolution began. By the time the dust settled, Nokia had lost its once dominant position. Internally, Nokia wrestled with anchoring bias. They were so fixated on the success of their earlier phone models that they couldn't pivot quickly. They also suffered from escalation of commitment, pouring resources into outdated designs instead of wholeheartedly embracing touchscreens and app ecosystems. The result? Nokia's market share plummeted. Microsoft eventually acquired Nokia's phone business, but by then the brand's heyday was long gone. Then there was the new Coke recipe fiasco in 1985. In the mid-1980s, Coca Cola decided to tweak its formula. Their market research indicated that a sweeter taste might compete with Pepsi's popularity. So they launched New Coke. Consumers flipped out. Angry letters, protests, and public outcry ensued. Within months, New Coke was pulled, and Coca-Cola Classic was back on the shelves. What went wrong? Market research tested flavor preferences in isolation, ignoring the emotional attachment people had to the brand. This is projection bias, where Coca-Cola's executives assumed that if people liked the new flavor in a taste test, they'd abandon decades of emotional loyalty to the classic brand. They also fell victim to emotional neglect bias, overlooking the intangible reasons customers embraced the original product. The fiasco ended up reaffirming just how deeply a brand can reside in the cultural psyche and how risky it is to mess with it. Let's go to 1998, when Yahoo rejected Google. Before Googling was a verb, Yahoo was an internet giant. In 1998, the Google founders approached Yahoo hoping to sell their startup search engine technology for a modest sum. Yahoo, seeing itself as the big dog, basically dismissed the proposal. They underestimated the power of a pure search algorithm, focusing instead on their own portal strategy. This is a textbook case of short-term thinking and underestimation bias. Yahoo saw Google's technology as an interesting but not crucial novelty. They also prioritized immediate ad revenue and user retention strategies, failing to imagine a future in which search would dominate the internet. Fast forward a few years. Google soared in search and online advertising, while Yahoo struggled to stay relevant. It's an enduring lesson in how ignoring long-term shifts for short-term comfort can doom a company. Now let's talk the WeWork's IPO collapse in 2019. WeWork started out offering co-working spaces and quickly turned into a giant with a massive valuation, billions of dollars. But behind the scenes, there were questionable financials and the charismatic CEO, Adam Neumann, who proposed ideas like WeWork preschools, WeWork wave pools, and all sorts of grand visions that had little to do with renting earthen desks. Investors and board members who should have been critical were blinded by Groupthink and the founder's near mythical persona, what we might call charismatic leadership bias. The company's documents leading up to the IPO painted a financial house of cards, but the hype was so strong that many seemed to ignore it. Once the media started pointing out all the red flags, it resulted in WeWork withdrawing its IPO, its valuation plummeting, and the co-founder CEO stepping down. It's a perfect modern example of how overconfidence and the desire to believe in the next big thing can overshadow basic due diligence. Let's move to the pop culture's examples. Remember the Fyre Festival meltdown in 2017? The Fyre Festival was billed as a luxurious, influencer-endorsed music festival on a gorgeous Bahamian island. Instead, attendees arrived to find soggy mattresses, run-down tents, zero actual music acts, and not a single gourmet meal in sight. Remember the sad cheese sandwich photo that went viral? The halo effect played a massive role. Big-name influencers and a flashy founder hyped the festival. Then came the sunk cost fallacy. As red flags piled up, organizers kept throwing money and illusions at a sinking ship because they'd already promised the moon on social media. Combine that with optimism bias, the belief that somehow it'll all come together, and you have a perfect storm. The festival flopped spectacularly, sending its founder, Billy McFarland, to prison for fraud. Then came the Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes story. Elizabeth Holmes presented Theranos as the revolutionary blood testing company. She claimed their device could run hundreds of tests from just a single drop of blood. Investors salivated at the prospect, pouring money into a company that was, in essence, more promise than product. The fiasco was fueled by authority bias. Holmes donned the Steve Jobs-like persona, wearing black turtlenecks and speaking with unwavering confidence. She courted high-profile board members from politics and the military who had clout but limited biotech expertise. Halo effect made it worse. Holmes's intelligence and ambition blinded many to the obvious gaps in the technology. Overconfidence sealed the deal. The assumption that if you had enough brilliance and venture capital, you could will a non-functional technology into existence. It all came crashing down once investigative journalists revealed the truth. In early 2021, a group of Reddit users in the Wall Street Bets community decided to buy up shares of GameStop, a struggling brick-and-mortar video game retailer. Their goal was twofold: profit off a short squeeze and stick it to Wall Street hedge funds that had bet on GameStop's failure. This became a social and financial phenomenon almost overnight. Bandwagon effect was off the charts. Thousands of people jumped in without fully understanding the risks, simply because it felt exhilarating to be part of something big. Some might also say Schadenfreude bias was at play, the delight in causing hedge funds to lose billions. While a few folks made a fortune, many who bought in at the peak ended up losing money. It's a cautionary tale of how mass psychology can drive stock prices wildly off their fundamental values. Let's shift to a more tragic example. In 1986, NASA's Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart shortly after launch, killing all 7 crew members. Investigations later revealed that engineers had warned about the O-ring's vulnerability in cold temperatures, but NASA management, facing political and public pressure, pushed ahead with the launch. This is a devastating illustration of groupthink. The environment shut down concerned voices. People who raised concerns were overridden or felt it was safer to keep quiet. Overconfidence also played a role. NASA had successfully launched multiple shuttles before, and they believed their track record would continue. The result was one of the most heartbreaking failures in space exploration history. Each of these stories, from corporate collapses to cultural fiascos, shows us something about how biases can warp reality. It's one thing to read about them in psychology textbooks, but another to see them spelled out in real-world catastrophes, costing billions of dollars or even, tragically, human lives. So, why do these biases have such a strong hold on us, especially when the stakes are so high? Psychologist Daniel Kahneman famously distinguishes between 2 modes of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and often emotional. It helps us react to immediate dangers. Think of it as your fight or flight autopilot. It's also the home of many biases because it uses mental shortcuts, called heuristics, to make rapid judgments. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and effortful. It's the part of your mind that weighs pros and cons, does complex math, and second-guesses hunches, but it's also lazy. We only engage System 2 when we really have to, and in high-stress or time-pressured situations, we often revert to System 1. In each of the disasters I covered, there were high stakes: big money, corporate survival, personal ego, even national pride. Under that kind of pressure, System 1 has the wheel and biases run the show. Overconfidence can ride in because your adrenaline is telling you, we got this. Groupthink thrives because nobody wants to be pessimistic when everything seems urgent. Another layer is motivated reasoning. We want to believe we're making the right calls. We look for evidence that supports our desires and conveniently ignore the evidence that doesn't. As psychologists like Ziva Kunda point out, people aren't just passive recipients of data. We actively shape data to fit our hopes and fears. This doesn't mean people in these fiascos were stupid, far from it. Many were extremely intelligent. But intelligence doesn't make you immune from bias. In fact, sometimes it can make you more skilled at justifying bad decisions because you're better at rationalizing them with fancy arguments. So, at its core, bias is not always about stupidity. It's about speed, emotion, and limited information. When you combine these ingredients in high-pressure situations, you get a recipe for epic disasters, like Blockbuster ignoring Netflix or NASA pushing forward with the Challenger launch. So, what are the takeaways? Now, it's tempting to point at these case studies and say, wow, those people really messed up, and leave it at that. But these biases aren't just corporate boardroom problems or big budget fiascos. They affect all of us every day in our relationships, our finances, and our decision-making about our careers, health, and beyond. So, how do we guard against them? Let's talk about practical strategies. Encourage slow thinking, aka System 2. Make time to pause, whether you're buying a house or deciding on a new project at work. Force yourself to step back. Gather more data. Sleep on big decisions. Doing this interrupts the autopilot of System 1. Nurture rebel cultures. If you run a team or company, cultivate an environment where people aren't afraid to disagree. That goes against the grain of groupthink. Encourage robust discussions and reward those who speak up with alternative viewpoints, devil's advocate roles. Assign someone to challenge every major decision. Their job is to find flaws in the plan. This might feel uncomfortable or negative, but it's crucial for catching mistakes before they become disasters. Decision audits. After making a big choice, do a postmortem. Ask, what did we expect would happen? What actually happened? Which biases might have influenced us? Being honest in these reviews fosters a culture of continuous improvement. These strategies might sound like extra steps in an already busy world, but they can save you from major headaches and, as we've seen, major fiascos. On a personal level, think of your relationships. How often do we assume we're right without actually listening to the other person's perspective? Overconfidence can wreck more than board meetings. It can wreck marriages and friendships too. This brings us to the end of not just today's episode, but of our entire season. We've journeyed through the landscape of human cognition, from prejudice and groupthink to loss aversion, and now to full-blown catastrophes driven by bias. The common thread? Our brains are brilliant organs, but they come with built-in shortcuts that can lead us astray if we're not vigilant. As we close out, I want to leave you with a simple yet powerful reminder. Bias is part of being human, but awareness is the first step to mastering it. When you recognize a bias in action, you can pause, reflect, and make a more informed decision, whether you're a CEO steering a corporation or a parent guiding a family. For those of you itching for more, fear not. Next season, I will examine another frontier of cognitive science. I don't want to spoil too much, but let's just say we'll be exploring how our minds handle the unknown, the uncertain, and the improbable. Thank you for spending your time with me on Mind Matters. I hope these episodes have ignited a sense of curiosity, helped you spot mental shortcuts in your own life, and, most importantly, reminded you that nobody is immune to bias. It's not about feeling guilty or ashamed. It's about growing wiser, one insight at a time. Please share this episode if it resonated with you. Let's keep spreading the word about how our minds work and how we can harness that power for good. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, the human mind is both our greatest asset and our biggest wildcard. I will link all the studies and references in the show's description. If you found this discussion insightful, please consider sharing it with friends, family, or colleagues. Let's keep the conversation going about how we can make this affluent corner of Europe a healthier, more equitable place for everyone. Until next time, remember, your mind matters, and taking care of it is the